and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Malaysia is awaiting the findings of a special investigation into MACC Chief Commissioner Tan Sri Azam Baki's share ownership, which according to the government, the report will be presented this week. Now, this controversy in MACC has reignited questions about the credibility of the credibility at the country's top anti-corruption body, and there are growing calls for a royal commission of inquiry, which the Prime Minister says is too early to decide on. So the question we want to ask tonight is whether the current process is enough to restore public confidence, or whether a deeper independent probe, an RCI, is needed. So joining me on the show to discuss this further is Arief Hamizan, who is the head of Research and Policy Advocacy at the Centre to Combat Corruption and Cronyism, better known as the C4 Centre. Arief, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. So the reason why I thought it was really great to talk to someone from C4 is because you guys released a report about a month ago in January, which had several case studies, and in those case studies that really highlighted the need for why there needs to be improved oversight into MACC. Can we talk a little bit about that? When you look at all the case studies that were presented in this report, were there similarities that you noticed? Were there any trends within those case studies that you can point to?
Thank you. Firstly, Melissa, thank you for the invitation to speak. Really happy to be here. I think in terms of the case studies, it would be good to maybe give a bit of context as to which, what are the oversight bodies that we're thinking about when it comes to the MACC. So according to the MACC, there are 5 oversight bodies. 3 of them are established by the MACC Act, and 2 of them are established by administrative order. That means that they're appointed under the executive. What we found is that all of these bodies are actually advisory bodies. They don't have powers to investigate. They don't have powers to compel documents, to call upon witnesses. And because of that, when we looked at the case studies, which I think I have to credit my co-author Benjamin Chong, he did a lot of legwork for this. There were many similarities in terms of the way that the MACC was able to evade accountability. Particularly the officers within the cases themselves. So some key cases that we looked at were Azam Baki's first shareholding scandal. We also looked at the death of Teo Beng Hock and the role of certain MACC officers implicated. And also one other important one would be the case of Syed Saddiq's corruption scandal, where according to the Court of Appeal, certain witnesses were actually intimidated throughout the MACC process. So what we found was that even though there was potentially statements from these oversight bodies, public statements clearing the MACC of any sort of wrongdoing or reform, there were many times when an RCI, like in the case of Teo Beng Hock, showed otherwise. And there was actually no way in which any other independent body, an external body, or even within the government was able to act upon these recommendations. Because ultimately, when you look at the structure of the MACC, you find that it's pretty much self-regulating and almost entirely under the influence of the executive through the appointments of the Prime Minister and so on. So those are some of the trends that we've seen so far.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about these oversight bodies. So as you said, MACC overseen by 5 bodies. On practice, I'm curious to know, in practice, how these bodies work. Are they, with those statements that you said that they released after these case studies, are they able to hold MACC accountable? Had MACC changed after the advisory statements that they put out? And you mentioned they're also linked to the executive. Can we talk a little bit about that? Are they insulated from political pressure?
Okay, maybe I can speak to the second question first. In terms of political pressure, every single body is, all of their members are appointed by the Prime Minister, either indirectly or directly. So for the first 3 bodies, which are established by the MACC Act, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong will appoint the members on the advice of the Prime Minister. And for the other 2, all of the members are appointed directly by the Prime Minister. So because of that, clearly there is some conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest when we're thinking about them investigating another body which is under the executive. Now, relating to your first question, there doesn't seem to be. Sorry, can you remind me what the first question was?
Whether or not these these oversight bodies, when they release their statements advising the MACC for change or accountability, does that work? Does it hold the MACC accountable for what they hope will change?
Unfortunately, we know very little about the operations of these advisory bodies. When you look at the annual reports of the MACC, what is often listed is only the appointment of the members of these bodies. So often it only occurs internally, from what we've found so far. We've tried calling the office many times over the past year during our research, and we were able to find very little information about it. So in terms of the effectiveness, I think there's very little way for us to gauge how well these bodies actually do recommend the MACC to improve.
All right. You mentioned there was a case study into the death that looked at the death of Teo Peng Hock and how the MACC responded. Talk to me about that, because there was an RCI into the death of Teo Peng Hock, and now we have growing calls to establish a Royal Commission of Inquiry to help address some of the concerns around accountability within MACC with the shareholding controversy. Was there what did the RCI into Teo Peng Hock's death achieve really for MACC accountability?
Yeah, I think ultimately when we look at it, we have to understand that the RCI is a fact-finding investigative body, and it is empowered with legal powers to investigate, to compel witnesses, compel documents, and produce a report. With the Teo Peng Hock case, I think it's a very tragic case, and even more tragic that the family are still searching for justice all these years later, because the RCI found and published and reported that certain MACC officers were implicated, and the abuses that they conducted towards Teo Peng Hock did contribute to his death. And this was also a finding of the Court of Appeal. Unfortunately, when it comes to information and prosecutorial powers, that is in the hands of the executive. And for some reason, we've seen the multiple NFAs over the past few years relating to this case. We do wonder, whether or not there is any other option. But I would still say that an RCI is extremely integral to this current Azam Baki shareholding scandal, because as much as the government doesn't want us to speculate, there will be speculation until we find what the actual facts are. And the current investigative committee, which has been established by the government, does not have the same legal footing as an RCI would. So in terms of trust building with the public, in terms of what the credibility of these, the findings of the investigation, it's very limited when you compare it to an RCI.
Why is that important? Why is it so important that an anti-corruption agency like the MACC have the full confidence of the public?
Some would say that the chief commissioner of the MACC is the most powerful man in the country. The MACC as an institution has a lot of information on a lot of corrupt activities which happen, which can be used to intimidate, which can be used for selective prosecution by bad faith actors. The MACC is legally granted powers, wide powers to freeze bank accounts, to investigate witnesses, and to compel documents, and all these sorts of things. And unlike many other enforcement agencies, the MACC does not have any sort of public oversight mechanism. It doesn't report to Parliament. And that has been the issue from the establishment of the MACC. Teo Peng Hock's case was within the first year of the establishment of the MACC. And so it's very difficult for the public to truly believe that such a powerful institution with such little, which has seen its credibility whittled away over the years, is truly capable of ridding corruption in the country, especially as that's seen as many people as the most important issue.
Okay, so now I want to come to the recommendations that you put forward in your report. Where do you see the most urgent reforms, Arief? Where's the restructuring needed for MACC?
Great. I think maybe I could start with how we came to these recommendations is that we looked at international best practices. So a few references were the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which all nations in the world have signed to, which means that you have to establish an anti-corruption agency. But it doesn't give an outline or a very specific guide of how to run one. So that comes within the Jakarta Principles and also with the Colombo Commentary, which is an extension or discussion of the Jakarta Principles. And under those, there's two principles, which are internal accountability and external accountability. And what it says is that anti-corruption agencies must, even though that they are independent, they cannot be arbitrary. They have to be subject to rule of law. And what that means is that there has to be a powerful external accountability mechanism as a check on the powers of this very, very powerful anti-corruption agency. So the first urgent reform proposal that we've given, which is not new, but it is that the Chief Commissioner's appointment and the dismissal must go through Parliament. Parliament as the House of Representatives, where the Rakyat's voice is heard, should have a say and should be able to vote on the appointment of this very powerful position and also dismissal. This diffuses the responsibility away from just a single individual, and it makes more people accountable. And I think that can only be a good thing. Secondly, the MACC should be under the oversight of the proposed Malaysian Ombudsman Office. So the Ombudsman Office is proposed, it's been a reform long time coming, and it's been proposed as something which is an independent body which will have these powers of investigation to compel witnesses and documents and to propose recommendations publicly. It initially was described as a body to look into the civil service, to look at government agencies, but our proposal means that it has to be extended. The scope of this jurisdiction has to be extended to the MACC, because otherwise there's no way for the public to know what's going on with the MACC and what recommendations are being proposed, and also whether or not they're acted upon.
Arief, those recommendations, do they require change of legislation, or is it purely a governance structure issue?
They do. All of them require either legal amendments or new laws to be introduced. However, if we're thinking about quick wins, I think the quickest win could be that all of the advisory bodies, all of these oversight bodies, will just publish their findings. It's not very difficult. In fact, the MACC annual report is supposed to be tabled in Parliament by law every year. And there are years sometimes where we don't see that annual report being tabled. So I think if they just uphold this duty of disclosure, then I think that solves a major problem without having to compel them to do so.
Arief, thank you so much for sharing those insights with us, as well as the work of the C4 team in putting out that report. That was Arief Hamizan from the C4 Centre. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our conversation about the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission Agency, which is once again under scrutiny as we, as a country, await the outcome of an investigation into MACC Chief Commissioner Tan Sri Azam Baki's shareholding. Now, the question that's being asked right now is, should there be an RCI into MACC, a Royal Commission of Inquiry on MACC. Joining me on the show now to discuss this further is human rights lawyer Charles Hector. Charles, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I'm hoping we can start broad, maybe just set the scene first. When you are looking at this from a bird's eye view, Charles, what are the concerns of the recent events that involving MACC? What has that raised for you?
I think with regards to the issue involving MACC, the shareholding issue is actually a small issue because it's misconduct. I think the bigger issue is in terms of when allegations are made by third parties, could be media like Bloomberg and anybody else. For example, in September, Bloomberg reported that Anwar allegedly instructed MACC Commissioner Azam Baki not to investigate Farage in connection to share purchase involving a development of a new billion ringgit immigration system. The report also claimed that Anwar directed MACC to investigate Tun Mahathir Mohamad, his sons and longtime associates, Daim Sainuddin. 12 February, Bloomberg reports the question was raised, who is watching Malaysian anti-corruption watchdog? And the issue that was raised, which is concerning many people are very concerned about, is that issue about the corporate mafia and the possibility that MACC might be involved by abusing its powers to help certain businessmen. So these are the two, I think, the issues that must be addressed first, more than anything else, But unfortunately, in Malaysia and many countries, the first reaction whenever allegations are made about the law enforcement institutions, the prime minister, and public officers, the response is first a knee-jerk response. Oh, the government cannot do wrong, and therefore, it's all lies. But that should never be the case. In terms when anybody raises any information, allegations, suspicions of crime, abuse of power, corruption, whatever it is, the first duty is to investigate the allegations thoroughly. Because law enforcement is the one who has the power and the capacity to do a proper, comprehensive investigation. That should be the policy. And the second policy, I think so, in terms of we should not attack the whistleblower, the person who exposes the crime, because that is actually going to be deterrent. It will actually deter the public from actually bravely coming out and exposing some wrong doings of the government or its agencies. But we don't want that. But in the case of the Bloomberg expose in the first one, what was reported in Parliament was that basically they were investigated for criminal defamation. And finally, the minister informed us in Parliament that the decision has to be made, no further action. But the question is that, was the allegations that Bloomberg raised in their report ever investigated? That is the question.
Right.
Even now, sir, with the recent listing, Bloomberg's report is fairly detailed with a lot of evidence, naming names, naming situations, and so on and so forth. But the moment now is that still there is no confirmation whether it's going to be investigated. Because
I might just jump in here, Charles, and say, so I believe the government has said that there is a special investigation into the MACC chief's share ownership. We're all awaiting that report. Apparently it's supposed to come at any time this week. But one of the things I'm curious to know how you feel is about the RCI. Do you think that there should be an RCI established to look into this? And I'm curious to know what you think an RCI would achieve. And conversely, what it would signal if the government decides against one.
Before going to the RCI, it is said that the government is just investigating Azam's shareholding. Why is it not investigating all the other allegations about the corporate mafia? That is the bigger concern. Now, in terms of a RCI, Royal Commission of Inquiry, it's a very good idea, and we have the Commission of Inquiry Act 1950. But the problem or the concern is the composition of the RCI. Who is going to be the commissioners in the RCI? Who picks? Who chooses? And the second concern is the terms of reference. Because if the RCI is confined to a very minor thing, like just investigating the shareholding issue, then it's going to be not effective. Then people are asking, what about the other issues, the corporate mafia issue? What about the issue about the Prime Minister's alleged interference in the MACC? So the RCI should investigate everything, not just actually confined to a very limited scope, but everything, including also in terms of MACC, because the one question that is raised is who monitors MACC. Remember the last RCI we had about the police, it was a RCI that actually recommended the independent commission to look into the misconduct and crimes of the police. But the RCI, the other concern is that after the RCI, will the final report be made available to the public? Because we all remember the RCI on Wang Klian, mass graves and human trafficking camp. RCI commenced in 2018, completed their job on 2019 September, submitted their report to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, but the report only became accessible to the public in October 2022. So the concern is that if we have a RCI, will they come out quickly and actually inform us about their findings and recommendations, or will it be kept a secret? That's also another question, this thing. And then also in terms of the RCI, it should be given the power to actually identify whether anyone is criminally liable for the offense and be able to make recommendation that these persons who are criminally liable be prosecuted. But the question then is asked is that we have had so many RCIs and task force and even SWACAM and EIC public inquiry reports. After the report, what happens? Sometimes what is said is that the law enforcement and prosecution do not actually follow up. Nobody gets charged in court. So that's the question in terms of the RCI, which we must always be concerned about.
So one of the things that you raised that I thought was interesting is that it's not just about individual controversies. It's not just about individual cases. There's a larger issue with maybe the governance architecture of MACC. Talk to me about that, about the concerns you have that recent events have raised for you about MACC. And I do wonder, because we have Azam Baki's term ending in May, and what you think should happen next for MACC post Azam Baki.
I think in terms of MACC, I think the major concern is that it has to have legal reforms to make it independent. The fact now, who is the minister in charge? Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, because it comes under the Prime Minister's purview. Who picks the MACC chief? Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. The 5 monitoring bodies, 3 statutory bodies, for example, Anti-Corruption Advisory Board, appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister. Special Committee on Corruption, nominated by the Leader of the House of Representatives. But look at their role. Their role is to just advise the Prime Minister and to make an annual report, where the report is also supposed to be circulated in the House of Parliament. Why annual report? Shouldn't it be actually empowered to make immediate reports whenever something issues this thing? Then you have the Complaints Committee appointed by the Minister, and the Minister again is the Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. So there is a great concern about the independence of this law enforcement entity. And Malaysia has actually, of late, very concerned about this. We have already talked about the independence of the Malaysian judiciary, how the Independent Judicial Appointments Commission. We are now looking at the issue of the independence of the public prosecutor. So the question is that this should be changed. Who should appoint and everything? So there is the need for law reform. Now, the second concern with this thing is that MACC's policy, when there is, or law enforcement policy, when they receive a report, an allegation, they should investigate that first, not go after the whistleblower. Sadly, in terms of MACC, it's got a bad track record, because the last time somebody raised the issue about Azam Baki's shareholding, he sued the journalist Falita Kunaratnam. And 21st February, just recently, he has again sued Bloomberg and again confined to the whole question of his past shareholding and assets. Then the same thing is also been happening in other commission. MCMC, the Communication Multimedia Commission, basically also raised sued Murray Hunter, where criminal action was against him as well as civil action. So the policy, the new policy the government should consider is that they should prohibit any such slap action, especially from government, prime minister, or whatever. This should be made a law. However, if it was personal in nature, nothing to do with the public office you hold, you have a right to take legal action, but in a personal capacity only, because it's very bad. Because we don't want to create the culture. Don't you dare reveal or highlight any wrongdoing done by the Prime Minister, ministers, government, MACC, MCMC. If you do, be ready to face retaliation, criminal action, or civil suit. We don't want that culture. We want people to continue to be free.
Right. When you are referring to SLAP, Charles, you're referring to the strategic lawsuits against political public participation, yes?
Yes.
Right.
One more. Can I raise one more issue?
Sure. In the final minute we have left, yes.
Yeah. Can in terms of who monitors MACC, I suggest that the first government response was to put MACC under the jurisdiction of EAIC, Enforcement Agency Integrity Commission. Of course, Parliament should also maybe think about setting up a parliamentary committee to continuously monitor all law enforcement entities. In terms of your question about who should replace Azam Baki, if his term is ending, I think at the present moment, one thing is important. Maybe one of the deputy commissioner, Ahmad Kusairi, Nur Razlan, Muhammad Razali, and Junipa Wandi. One of them, maybe point the most serious. But for the independence, security of tenure is key. So in terms, the appointment should be until the mandatory retirement age of 60, full stop.
Okay, right. Charles, thank you so much for sharing some of those insights and bringing up those really important points. I appreciate your time. That's human rights lawyer Charles Hector there, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.